Welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at the 4 different key components that you need to learn in order to pass your exam. And then we'll also have a look at the exam blueprint. So to make the exam easier, we basically split things up into 4 key or core services. So compute, storage, databases, and networking. And when we go into the exam guide, you'll find that there's a lot of services that you need to know, but most of these services can be shoehorned or pigeonholed into one of these 4 core services. So compute, storage, databases, and networking. And so long as you have a good understanding of these 4 core topics, then you will definitely be able to pass your exam. And we'll start with compute. So essentially compute, you wouldn't be able to build an application without compute power, so you're going to need something to crunch the data. And typically we think of compute as servers or virtual machines. It can also be things like serverless, things like Lambda, which we're going to look at in a lot more detail. But compute is just the way that we process our information. So some key services in compute that we're going to cover off in this course is EC2, which are essentially just virtual machines. Lambda, which is a way of doing it serverlessly, so there are no virtual machines. All you worry about is your code. We have Elastic Beanstalk, which is a provisioning engine. So this is a way of basically automating the deployment of your applications within AWS. So you don't need to know a lot about AWS to use Elastic Beanstalk. Essentially, you just throw your code at it and it will basically grow out the web servers, load balancers, etc. that you need. And those are the key compute services for a Solutions Architect Associate exam. Once we've computed our data, we need somewhere to store it. So storage. So think of storage as a giant disk in the cloud. It's a safe place to leave your information. And one of the key services, in fact, one of the very first services with AWS is our simple storage service, which is sometimes, well, it's always abbreviated to S3. You also have Elastic Block Store. This is basically a virtual hard disk that we attach to our virtual machines. We're going to learn a lot more about that. We have Elastic File Service, which is a way of storing our files centrally. We then have FSX, and we have Storage Gateway. We're going to cover all this off in a lot more detail as we go throughout the course. So moving on to the next key technology you need to understand going into your exam are databases. And the easiest way to think of a database is simply a spreadsheet. It's a way of storing information. It's a reliable way to store and retrieve information. And there are various different services that come under databases that we're going to cover off. First is Relational Database Service, or RDS. We then have DynamoDB, which is a non-relational database, and we'll cover off what the differences are in the database section. And we then have a Redshift, which is basically a database, a warehousing technology. Moving on from databases, we're going to learn about networking. Networking is just a way for our compute, storage, and databases to communicate with each other, and even a place for them to live in. And this is where networking comes in. So we're going to learn about VPCs, and VPCs are basically virtual data centers in the cloud. This is where all our resources are going to live. So our compute, our storage, our databases, etc. Then have Direct Connect. Direct Connect is a way of directly connecting your headquarters or your on-premise data centers to AWS. We're going to learn about that in more detail. Route 53 is a way of doing a DNS, so it's a way of registering domain names and then pointing them at our web servers, for example. We have API Gateway. This is basically a serverless way of replacing your web servers. We're going to learn a lot more about that. And then we have AWS Global Accelerator, and this is a way of accelerating your audiences towards your applications within AWS. So that is networking. So the next thing we're going to do is go over and have a quick look at the exam guide. But I don't want it to freak you out at this early stage. The exam guide is extremely complicated with a whole bunch of services that are either in scope or out of scope. Don't let it worry you. This course will cover everything you need to know in order to pass the exam. So in order to find the exam guide, just go over to Google and type in AWS Solutions Architect Associate Exam Guide, and I'm sure you'll be able to find it on AWS's website. So this is what the exam guide looks like. It's 17 pages long. It's going to tell you that there's a different response types. You've got multiple choice or multiple responses, and there's 65 questions in the exam. Interestingly, only 50 questions affect your score. There's 15 unscored questions that do not affect your score, and you don't know whether or not the question you're doing is a scored or unscored one. So it's a bit of a lottery. But for that reason, don't let a question freak you out, or if you feel like you're getting answers wrong, chances are you're probably getting them wrong on the unscored ones, because these are new questions that they're rolling out. So if we scroll down, we'll be able to see the 4 different domains. So we've got design secure architectures, design resilient architectures, design high performing architectures, and design cost optimized architectures. And each domain will basically give you a breakdown of different task statements. So we've got task statement 1, design secure access to AWS resources. And then you need knowledge of these things, and you need skills in these things. Task statement 2, design secure workloads and applications. You need knowledge of and skills in. And you scroll down, it's quite long and quite tedious, to be honest. But if we go down all the way to the bottom, past our different domains, you'll be able to see down here in the appendix sections which key tools, technologies, and concepts might be covered in the exam. And remember, we started this lecture talking about compute, databases, networking, and storage. And those are really the key services. Now, you've got all these other things like high performance. High performance can be a combination of things like compute, databases, networking, and storage, etc. Same with security, same with resiliency. So that's the way we break it down, just to make it easy, so across the 4 different technological platforms. And then down here, you'll be able to see that there's a whole bunch of AWS services and features that you're going to need to know. So don't let this freak you out at this early stage. We will cover all of this in the appropriate levels. So for some of them, for example, it will be very, very high level that you need to know. For example, AWS Elastic Transcoder. You just literally need to know what it does. You don't need to know much about it. But for things like EC2, which is a compute service, you will need to know that a lot more in detail. So that's what this course does. It makes it a lot easier for you. You'll be able to learn the specific technologies in detail that you need to know in order to pass the exam. You can see there's a lot of things that are in scope, and then there's a lot of things that are out of scope. So have a read through the exam blueprint, but don't let it freak you out or anything. We will cover everything off in this course in order for you to pass your exams. So the key services to know for the exams are compute, which consists of EC2, Lambda, and Elastic Beanstalk. Storage, which consists of S3, EBS, EFS, FSX, and Storage Gateway. Databases, we're going to cover off RDS, DynamoDB, and Redshift. And networking, we're going to cover off VPCs, Direct Connect, Route 53, API Gateway, and AWS Global Accelerator. So this will be throughout the entire course. The first technology we're going to cover off is identity access management. And this is essential to know because it's how you create users and groups and grant access to people to use AWS. Once we've learned that, we're going to go into storage. So we're going to start with storage. We're going to start with S3. So that is it for this lecture, everyone. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.